the Examiner, and noted that at the Peterborough Cenotaph, 24 wreaths were laid, and at the Lakefield Cenotaph, 54 wreaths were laid. So you can tell the history for sure of our surrounding area, and to me it's so different. Like a little village with that many people acknowledging the day. And tonight I'm to introduce our guest speaker, Judge Ted Collins, retired Judge Ted Collins. He's also going to include a few tidbits from his wife, Mara, maybe some things we haven't heard before. And most of you know where the home is located on Smith Street, near the canal. So, Ted, without further ado, thank you.
If you have trouble hearing me, let me know and I will use the mic. I'm in the practice of speaking without a mic, and it's just a matter of whether the room suits my kind of projection. Can you hear me back there?
No, please use the mic.
All right, thank you.
You'll wander off after a while.
There we go. Is it on? Can you hear me now?
Could be louder.
All right. We moved out of Westove 1 year and 3 days ago. My wife Myra was the instigator because she was worried that we should not wait until we had to move. So we went shopping for condos to reduce the amount of work we had to do. We checked all the ones in Peterborough. I've been born and raised in Peterborough, and I like the city a lot. But we wound up in Prince Andrew Place, even though there are some condos that are superior in Peterborough. But I'm a village person. I can walk to everything. You can't do that in Peterborough if you're in a condo. I can walk to the pharmacy. I meet all my friends at the pharmacy counter. That's the age I'm at. I can walk to the bank. I can walk to the liquor store. That's important because my wife has a taste for wine. Myra is the person who really knows much more about the house and its history than I do. And so she did provide me with some notes, and some of it will sound pretty pedestrian, but we'll get through it all right. Catherine Parr Traill was born in 1802 in London, England, number 5 of 8 children. 1807, they moved to Raden Hall in Sussex. And of course, there's a Raden Hall here, Samuel Strickland's house. In 1832, she married Thomas Traill and moved to Canada. She settled first on Lake Catchalanuka near Bendennis, which is currently the home of John Barker and the late lamented Rosalind Barker. Prior to that, it had been owned by Art and Molly Newson. Many of you would have known them. From there, the Trails moved to Ashburnham, and in 1846 to Rice Lake. In 1857, the house on Rice Lake was destroyed by fire. 2 years later, Thomas died. With that in mind, Samuel and Robert Strickland purchased the property for Westove, and it was built in 1860. I'll be telling you a little bit about the kind of construction of that house. It's remarkable for 1860 in Lakefield. The house was completed in 1860, and The owners, in fact, were Catherine Agnes Strickland Traill, Mary Elizabeth Jane Traill, later Mucho, and Fotheringham Traill, later Atwood. And it was listed with Catherine Parr Traill to be a life tenant, so they couldn't kick her out. She never actually owned the place, but she still did a lot of her research and work, botanical work, and writing in the house. She was there from 1862 to 1899, 37 years. The house, after Catherine died in 1899, wound up in the ownership of Catherine Parr Strickland Hill. And in 1937, it was purchased by Wallace Henry. Many of you would remember Wallace. He was a reeve of Lakefield for 1 or 2 years. 7 years later, Bill and Marg Grant purchased Westove, and they were in it for 24 years until 1968. Bill had horses, and he wanted to move to his property down on the 6th line of Duro, as it then was, and arranged to have a house built there and to keep his horses. His wife, Marg, had to be dragged out of Westove kicking and screaming, but she eventually went. And Myra and I bought it at that time, and we had it for 46 years. Catherine wrote a number of books before she left England, children's books particularly. And her most famous book is The Backwoods of Canada, and another one in 1868, Canadian Wildflowers. Something that is not mentioned much about Catherine Parr Traill is that she was the leading botanist in Canada on the subject of Canadian wildflowers. And she, in fact, gave many of them their names. She was quite a gardener, and we are told, Myra and I were told by Marg Grant, that one tulip that is down at the edge of the woods, that comes up every year, called a drunken lady tulip, was originally put there by Catherine Parr Traill. Now, can you imagine? That would have been more than 100 years ago. Have you ever heard of a tulip that did that sort of thing? But when we were there for the 46 years, that tulip came up every year. I could go on about all of her writings, but I think I'll get next to the construction of the house itself. If you look at the photographs, the front of the house, as everyone knows it today, was shaded somewhat by a full-length veranda. The house looks small from the street. It's really two houses put together. And the one at the back has the largest rooms. The window on the right, the east side, used to be a door, and but it opened the same way as the other windows do, and that downstairs has 5 windows, 6 feet by 4 feet, that all open up. And on a summer's day, you open those up with the woods just to the east, and you may as well be outside, except you don't get sunburned. All the sound of the birds and rustling of the leaves, you'll hear them all. This, in fact, was one of the charms for Margaret Lawrence. Margaret Lawrence had a heroine, and it was Catherine Parr Traill. In her last novel, The Diviners, she calls upon the assistance of St. Catherine, as she called her, because St. Catherine was a person of grit and determination and guts. And Margaret Lawrence admired that. But she especially liked the windows because it was a house that was built to let in so much natural light. And many houses at that time stressed the value of the natural light because artificial lighting really wasn't there. The other feature about the windows is that many of the window panes are still the originals. You know, with the ripples and the dots in them, and a certain amount of charm, even though your view of them it may be a little off kilter. The house itself was made of vertical planking, huge planks, stacked, one on the other, no airspace, until there was 6 inches of wood in there, and then the exterior was framed, but it was tongue and groove. Now, picture 1860, Lakefield's industry was able to produce tongue and groove, and that's better than clapboard because it fits much better. And I can remember a number of years ago when plastic siding was the thing, and we were constantly having people coming around urging us to get plastic siding, and we thought that was pretty funny. Of course, we turned them down. The floors downstairs are all oak hardwood, but you know, the narrow strips of the time. The interesting feature about them is that they're not half an inch deep, as most. They were 3/4 of an inch deep, and so they never seem to show the wear. When Catherine Parr Traill lived there, the interior was largely wallpapered. She was enamored with wallpaper, and it used to be said that the neighbors always knew when her remittance checks had come in from England, because they would see her coming home with rolls and rolls of wallpaper. Now, that wallpaper was still up when the Grants bought the property in 1944, and they stripped it all down to the bare walls and never had any wallpaper. They took off about 13 layers because Catherine Parr Traill and her family just simply put one layer upon another. They didn't bother taking them off. So I have a few pictures here that show some of the patterns of some of the wallpaper that was taken off. Now, dealing with the roof, of course, was always cedar shingle, and when we replaced the roof, it was always cedar shingle, except we got British Columbia red cedar from interior BC because it lasts a little longer than the white cedar. The grains are farther apart, and so they don't. The shingles do not flex as much. Now, the property itself is 138 feet frontage, 189 feet depth, 5/8 of an acre. The woods would be about 45 feet of that frontage, going all the way down to the back. That's where the tree houses were. That's where the canoes were kept. And my kids would carry a canoe down to the canal and put it in and could paddle up to Young's Point and back. The woods were also used for sugaring off. For a number of years, we tapped the trees with the old-fashioned way, you know, with the old spigots and that. And we could boil it all up in the kitchen, but there was a big bell over the stove, so we didn't wind up with sticky wallpaper like many people do. The front, for 12 years, I built a rink on the entire front lawn, which was about 85 feet by 60, with lights up in the trees. And so the kids of the neighborhood did a lot of skating at that time. After 12 years, I'd had enough. Down at the back was the barn. Bill Grant had pulled off the summer kitchen from the west side, and it was not a very attractive piece of architecture, and he had it dragged down and had a corral put around the back for his horses. And maybe this is the time to tell you about Bill Grant and his horses. Bill Grant holds the record for being the Reeve of Lakefield the longest. They were one-year terms. He won 13 times. So he was Reeve for 13 years. He was the person who pushed for a municipal water in Lakefield. And when Lakefield got it, it was the first village in eastern Ontario to have municipal water. And councillors from all over eastern Ontario would come down to check it out. And it resulted in many other villages following suit, but his was the first. The other thing was, first thing in the morning, he kept track of everything that was going on in the village, and he would ride bareback, one of his horses, first thing in the morning, all around to check out all the sites where the work was going on, and then he would report back. But he kept track of it every day. The other thing about Bill was that all his years on council, he was a councillor for 3 or 4 years, and then Reeve for 13. He did all of the municipal legal work for the village of Lakefield for nothing. And at that time, and throughout most of his life, he was the top municipal lawyer in Peterborough County. So Lakefield was well served. He never took a penny from his legal work on behalf of the village until after he had retired and left the village. Myra and I wallpapered most of the house. We didn't like the constant gray that Bill and Mark seemed to enjoy living in. So we spiced it up with wallpaper a lot. A couple of interesting rooms in the house. The kitchen is 20 feet by 14. It's a farm kitchen with 2 of those big windows I told you about. And the ceilings are 10 feet. And a foot below the ceiling is a picture rail that goes around. You never hear about picture rails now, but they were used to hook a hanger on, and then you'd hang your pictures from that, so you wouldn't be nailing anything into the wall. And when we left, it was still there and still holding up a lot of pictures. The living room is unchanged in dimensions, and I think it's about 20 by 16, with, again, 2 of those windows, with the 5th window being on the den around the corner. The upstairs has sloping ceiling, and the master bedroom is over the kitchen, and the floor space of it is exactly the same as the kitchen below. The second bedroom was L-shaped, And we took off a chunk of it to make an upstairs bathroom. And there was still room to put bunk beds into the sloping ceilings on each side for our two girls. Our son had the third bedroom. So that's more or less the layout of it. I do have some photographs here of the house exterior. The best shots of the interior were done by our kids. All three of them wanted to buy the house. We refused. A recipe for problems. 3 kids, sell to one of them, the other 2 would be resentful. This was the only house they all knew. And so individually they came around and each one of them did it the same way. 5 upstairs, 5 minutes in a room, alone. 5 minutes in the next room, then on to the next room. Would cover the whole house, room by room. And then they would go outside, around the perimeter of the property, and then down into the woods to check the scattered remains of the tree houses that we had. Now, every one of them was choked up when finished, but they've been convinced that it was the right decision to go at this time. And we had the house on the market, I think, for about 10 days. And the first 2 offers came in and they were reasonably close, and they were close to each other. So we made inquiries as to the people buying them, and we got to choose who got it. We could have waited longer and perhaps got a little more money, but we wanted to be sure that they were left with stewards who would love the place. It's a house that deserves to be loved. Excuse me. Oh, just a couple of other things that I can tell you about the house. The barn, which originally had been a huge farm kitchen and had been dragged down into the corral, had an upstairs and a rickety ladder, and the kids set up tables and chairs in the upstairs, just them and the bats. There were lots of bats there. And I was very concerned about that rickety ladder, and a friend of mine who builds houses, or used to build houses, said, "Oh, I have an old staircase," he says. "You have to build a new one every time you do a house, because they don't quite fit with each other, but it'll work fine." So he brought it over, and I nailed it up into place, and on day 1, one of the neighbor kids fell down the stairs. And he had used that rickety ladder probably 20 to 30 times. The other thing that we have added to the house was Peter Pumpkin. On Halloween, for 35 years, we had a talking pumpkin. And the children of the area would come, and the little kids, you could get them talking to it. You know, I'd be around the corner with the mic, and I could chat with them, call them by name, and the little kids would really get enthusiastic. I could persuade some of the little girls to give it a kiss goodbye. and we brought it over with us, and it worked again, but it was more fun back at Westove. 2 years ago, one little boy came in and just simply said, "Pumpkins can't talk. Pumpkins can't talk." And then he got his stuff and ran out to his dad saying, "Dad, let's go home and make our pumpkin talk." Well, I think I've told you as much as I think is relevant, but if you think there's something more relevant, you can ask me some questions. Whether or not I can answer them, we'll see. Yes?
Where did the name Westove come from?
That was one of the houses that Catherine Parr Traill's parents had. Raiden Hall was another one, but Westove was one of the houses that they had, and I think it was in County Sussex. Now, I do have photographs here that you might find interesting. I think the one you might find most interesting, in fact, is one that was compiled by our children. They did all of the interior of the house, room by room, and you get an idea of what it's like on the inside, because most people can see it on the outside. One further point about the outside, the front of the house is not the street side, it's the river side. That was the official front of the house. And I can remember when we first moved in, and you would have people, lecturers from Lakefield College School, and they would come around and they would knock on that door to come in. That was the official front door. The front door is the original, and it's a real heavy one, I can tell you. The doors to the children's rooms and the other bedroom are all stable barn style. In other words, in halves, Dutch doors, some people call them. There's one downstairs too, and those were all original. And the door, not at the front as you see it now, but just inside the mudroom, that's an original door as well. Bill Grank always thought it was very funny. The little porch that you see there, that's enclosed, it was open at first, and he'd had it built to make it easier to get in and out of there once he'd hauled away the farm kitchen. And there were some historians who remarked that was the most classic, original feature of houses of that kind. Bill had designed the whole thing himself. He thought that was a great job. Myra and I enclosed it and made it into a real mudroom. But aside from that, and putting in the upstairs bathroom, and Bill had put in the downstairs bathroom, that's about all the alterations that were done in the house while we were there. Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned earlier that the house was actually two houses.
Yes, it's a combination. You'll be able to see the second one goes lengthwise in the property, and you can see how it's put together in the photographs. That was a fairly common way of building what were Canadian farm houses. Fairly common.
Thank you.
Yes?
The house is designated historical, is it not?
No.
No, because that's why I was asking about the renovations, that you're not then restricted. But I'm so pleased that you kept the original windows, because it's quite charming with the bubble glass.
Yeah, yeah. And you won't find a house anywhere that has windows like that at all. That's the distinguishing feature of the house, really. We have not done anything with those. Yeah.
How big is the lot on which the house sits? How big is the lot on which
The lot, 5/8 of an acre, 139 frontage, 189 depth, feet. It took me 2 hours to mow the lawn, and that was, and a good part of the property was in woods. took me 2 hours. As my wife said, it's a 5-beer long. Yes.
Was there any music in the home, like an organ or a piano?
Oh, yes. My wife's piano, which was built in 1904, Heinzmann upright, from the days when Heinzmann uprights were the best uprights in the world, and you should hear it. And we took it with us took 4 men to drive it, it's so heavy. But yes, I played at Fairhaven for 22 years now. And I played the songs of my parents' generation. And those people are from the generation where everybody sang. No television, right? Every house had a piano. So I play those songs. And when people say, what kind of music do you play? I say, loud. And just ask Gord Coyle. As I say, I chased him out of that neighborhood, I'm going to chase him out of this one. Yes?
Was there a summer kitchen, or was there anything like a basement, or something?
There's about a 2/3 basement. The people who have bought it are using that basement as a workshop. He does carpentry work, and there's room down there for that. Oddly enough, we had it tested to see if there was much leakage of cold air in the winter, and there was virtually none. Don't ask me why. I have no idea.
Scottish masons?
Yeah. For about 40 years, I had a slot racing set in the basement, 160 feet of track. And scenery was like a model railroad. You've seen it, Harry. And with 20 different cars that could run, they were all exact replicas of real cars. You know, I had to paint them all on the inside from photographs, even to the markings on the helmets of the drivers. So you could say, this is the 1972 Matra that won Le Mans 24 hours, and the driver is Graham Hill. And so we had a number of club members for competitive stuff, but most of them knew all this kind of motor racing history. I would have preferred to have had a railroad down there. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You sold this house and went into a condo?
No, we bought the condo and then put it on the market.
Yeah, okay. How in hell did you downsize?
Not easily.
I went from a house in
We
Peterborough.
had 3 kids.
Yeah.
We had 3 kids, and I think we got rid of pretty nearly half of our stuff. I had a locker, of course, when we moved, and it was stacked pretty well to the ceiling, and then there, and then the kids would come over and get into it and simply announce what they'd taken. That was good enough for us.
I have a problem. We sold, downsized, went into a condo, didn't like it, sold the condo, went back into a house, and now we should probably be in a senior's home. I need help.
Well, we don't have any leftover furniture. Yes?
I downsized from a 6-bedroom house to 1-bedroom apartment. It can be done.
There it is. We have an advisor. You should write a book on that. Yes, sir.
Where did you get the idea about the talking pumpkin? That's a wonderful thing.
Oh, that wasn't my idea.
Oh.
Years ago, in Lakefield, the United Church minister was the Reverend Jack Patterson. And he had a talking pumpkin. And I waited until he left. He showed me how it would work. And I waited until he went off to Thunder Bay on his next charge. Then I started it. So I think I've had it for about 35 years. And man, is it ever a lot of fun. Jack Patterson was a very progressive, interesting guy, but most interesting was He was the most awkward curler you ever saw. and had results. How many curlers here? How many curlers? I'll tell the story anyway. Jack got into the final of one of the club events and was playing against Karen's dad, Red Grave. And Red was a very stay-at-home kind of curler and liked to cover stuff up, you know, and guard. And they came to the final end, score tie. Jack had last shot, but Red had everything covered up. And he made his last shot just to make sure everything was covered up. And he came down the ice. Can't you see him? You know, and said to Jack, well, you may as well concede now. And Jack said, I'm going to make a shot. I'm going to win the game, he says. And if I do, you have to come to church Sunday morning. Well, the rocks were flying all around. And when the smoke cleared, Jack had won. Well, half the curling club was at church then. Got there early. And in came Red at the back, and Jack in his surplice and everything went all the way up to the back of the church and escorted him down to the front. A lot of wonderful stories about Red. Anything further on the house, the property, and the history? All right. So those who want to come up and look at some of here I am speaking with the mic. Want to see some of the pictures, I'll be glad to show them to you. I should tell you that there are two books that are really good. Sisters in the Wilderness by Charlotte Gray. It's about Susanna Moody and Catherine Parr Traill. This one is very well known. There's one that's lesser well known that I actually prefer. Sisters in Two Worlds by Michael Peterman. Michael Peterman is a retired history professor of Trent University, and he writes totally understandable, lovely language that is, you wouldn't believe it's academic, except you find out a whole lot of stuff. He's a wonderful writer. I recommend his. Sisters in Two Worlds, Michael Peterman. Okay, I'll sit down, and anyone who wants to look at these may.
Thank you very much, Ted, and on behalf of the Lakefield Historical Society, well, thank you. I think you'll find it interesting. I should point out that I was talking to Michael Peterman earlier today, and he sends his regrets. He would have loved to come, but he had two conflicts. So.
Oh, I can believe it.
Yeah. So anyway,
I can believe it. He is in demand. Great speaker, beautiful writer. His writing is more fluent and easier than Charlotte Gray's, and she's the one who's famous. But Michael Peterman, if Michael's had come out first.
Well, actually, he helped with.
Oh, I know, he did.
Yeah. But actually, Michael is now working on the biography of John Craig, so we might get him to come and talk to us. if he can stay in the country long enough. He toddles around a bit, but he's off to New York sometime in December to do some research on John Craig, and he's been off to Texas because John Craig's letters and papers are at the University of Texas. We're not sure how that happened, but I'm sure he would tell it. But anyway, I just wanted to mention if you do want to come and look at the pictures, etc. But before we head off, on behalf of the executive and Lakefield Historical Society, I just wanted to wish everybody happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year. We won't be meeting until March, so you've got a couple of months to rest up, and then you'll be stuck with me again because Don doesn't get back until April, and I know he's going to be missed. Everybody's looking very upset about him being away. And he's very upset about being away too in the warm climate.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, although apparently it's temperature's dropping in Florida, so I don't really care. Anyway, so thank you very much for coming out, and we have some cookies and coffee and whatnot, and as I said, Ted's got some pictures, and glad to talk to you, and enjoy your time, your social time. Thank you very much.